The medical bay of Epsilon 7 space station hummed with its usual activity. Machines beeped rhythmically. Staff members in various colored uniforms moved purposefully between stations, and the soft white lighting gave everything a clean, sterile appearance. This bustling hub of interspecies healthcare represented one of the Federation's proudest achievements, a truly multicultural medical facility capable of treating dozens of different species. Dr. Benjamin Carter stood at his workstation, reviewing patient files on his holographic display. After 12 years as a Starfleet medical officer, 8 of them on busy diplomatic outposts like Epsilon 7, he had developed a reputation for unflappable calm in the face of medical oddities. Over his career, he had treated plasma burns on Andorian antennae, delivered Tellarite quadruplets during a power outage, and once performed emergency surgery on a crystalline entity using nothing but sonic implements. Very little surprised him anymore. Benjamin, Ben to his colleagues, ran a hand through his short, dark hair and suppressed a yawn. Despite the excitement of living on a space station that served as a vital crossroads for dozens of species, the daily medical routines could become monotonous. Pre-mission physicals, diplomatic delegation screenings, and the endless documentation required by Starfleet medical sometimes made him miss the unpredictability of his earlier assignments. Dr. Carter became the voice of his assistant, medical technician Ilera. Your 1400 hours appointment has arrived. The Ktheran representative. Ben straightened. His interest immediately piqued. The Ktherans were newcomers to the galactic community, having only established first contact with the Federation 8 months prior. Their representatives had just begun appearing at diplomatic outposts like Epsilon 7 to establish scientific and cultural exchanges. This would be the first Ktheran he'd actually examine in person rather than simply studying in xenobiology briefs. Thank you, Ilera. Please show them in. What entered was not at all what Benjamin had expected, despite having reviewed the available anatomical references. The Ktheran stood approximately 170 centimeters tall, with a shimmering exoskeleton that seemed to shift between deep blue and violet under the medical bay's lights. The being was generally humanoid in overall structure, bipedal with 2 upper limbs, a defined head, and a torso, but the similarities largely ended there. The Ktheran exoskeleton consisted of overlapping chitin plates that moved with surprising grace and fluidity. Their head featured large, multifaceted eyes that glittered like polished amethysts, capable of independent movement and, according to the briefings, perceiving a much wider light spectrum than human vision. Instead of a nose or mouth, a series of delicate sensory appendages adorned the lower portion of the face, constantly sampling the air with subtle movements. Greetings, the Ktheran spoke, their voice emerging not from the face, but from small, resonating chambers positioned along the neck. The sound was melodious yet precise, with perfect enunciation. I am Biological Data Analyst Xyler, Ktheran Scientific Exchange Initiative, designation Alpha 57 Theta. I am here for the required medical examination as per Starfleet Regulation 3287.6. Ben nodded, gesturing to the examination table. Welcome to Epsilon 7, Analyst Xyler. I'm Dr. Benjamin Carter, Chief Medical Officer for this section. I'll be conducting your intake examination today. Xyler moved to the indicated position with precise, economical movements. Each step seemed calculated to use exactly the energy required, no more, no less. The chitin plates shifted in microscopic adjustments, suggesting an extraordinary level of fine motor control. I have reviewed your species' medical parameters that have been shared with Starfleet Medical. Ben continued, activating his medical scanner. But I should mention that the data provided by your government is somewhat limited. I'll need to establish baseline readings for several of your biological systems that aren't fully documented in our database. Xyler's multifaceted eyes rotated slightly, the equivalent of a human raising an eyebrow. Efficiency dictates that only necessary data be shared. The Ktheran Biological Council determined these parameters to be sufficient for interspecies medical coordination. Ben 90 diplomatically. Of course. We'll work with what we have and gather the rest through non-invasive scans. May I begin? Proceed. The initial examination proceeded smoothly, if somewhat awkwardly due to Zyler's minimal responses. Ben checked respiratory function, which in Ctherins involved a fascinating system of spiracles and air sacs rather than lungs. He monitored circulatory readings, testing the flow of the copper-based hemolymph that gave Ctherin blood its distinctive blue-green hue. Throughout it all, he maintained a professional running commentary, explaining each procedure and its purpose. Zyler observed everything with scientific detachment, occasionally asking brief, pointed questions about the medical equipment specifications or accuracy rates. The Ctherin showed particular interest in comparing human and Ctherin physiological efficiency metrics, noting with apparent satisfaction when Ctherin systems demonstrated superior performance. Your respiratory and circulatory systems show excellent function, Ben noted, reviewing the readings. Now, according to protocol, we need to conduct a check of your reproductive and endocrine systems. This is standard procedure for all diplomatic personnel regardless of species. Here, Ben hesitated slightly. The Ctherin biological documents had been particularly opaque regarding reproductive anatomy and function, merely noting that reproduction was centrally managed and conducted according to hive protocols. He would need to proceed carefully to avoid any cultural missteps. For this part of the examination, I'll need you to lie back on the biobed and place your lower limbs in these supports, he said, indicating the adjustable stirrups that extended from the end of the examination table. It will allow me to conduct a visual examination and collect cellular samples of your reproductive structures for baseline health assessment. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Zyler froze completely, the flowing movement of the chitin plates ceasing abruptly. The iridescent blue-violet of the exoskeleton flashed to a deep, alarming crimson, beginning at the thorax and radiating outward to the extremities. The multifaceted eyes locked on a Ben with laser-like intensity, and the sensory appendages around what would be the mouth region in a human went completely still. Zyler tilted their head at a precise 27-degree angle, a gesture that Ben would later learn indicated extreme confusion or threat assessment. When the Ctherin finally spoke, the usually melodious voice had taken on a sharp, brittle quality. Explain your logic, human. Why must I expose my egg ducts to you? This action is not within the approved mating schedule authorized by the hive mother. Reproductive organ exposure outside designated cycles constitutes an alpha-level violation of Ctherin biological protocol. Are you proposing unauthorized genetic contamination or attempting to initiate an unsanctioned reproductive cycle? Benjamin felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the magnitude of the cultural misunderstanding unfolding before him. Zyler had completely misinterpreted the purpose of a gynecological examination, viewing it solely through the lens of reproduction or biological violation. The look in those multifaceted eyes suggested this was no minor faux pas, but potentially a serious diplomatic incident in the making. Before Ben could formulate a response, Zyler had already activated a personal recording device embedded in one of their forearm plates, logging incident report for transmission to both Station Command and Hive Mother regarding a logical and potentially biologically aggressive behavior from Human Medical Officer Designation Carter Benjamin. Wait, please, Benjamin said quickly, raising his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. There's been a serious misunderstanding. This is a standard medical procedure with no reproductive intent whatsoever. Zyler's eyes rotated slightly, focusing on different facets. Explain. Ben took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. In human medicine, and that of many Federation species, we regularly examine reproductive organs for health maintenance purposes. It's not connected to actual reproduction, but rather to screening for diseases, abnormalities, or health issues that might develop in these systems. The Ctherin chitin plates had not yet returned to their normal coloration, though the red had dimmed somewhat. Your explanation is illogical. Why would a system designed exclusively for reproduction require examination outside of reproductive cycles if no reproduction is intended. Ben realized the fundamental disconnect. For Chtherans, with their precisely controlled biology and reproduction, the concept of preventative reproductive health care might be entirely foreign. Our biology is different, he explained carefully. Human reproductive systems, and those of many species, can develop health issues even when not actively reproducing. These examinations help prevent problems before they start or detect them early when treatment is most effective. Zyler's head remained tilted, the crimson hue of their exoskeleton fading only slightly. This practice seems inefficient and illogical. Ben knew he needed a different approach. Perhaps we could use an alternative method for this assessment. We have advanced molecular bioscanners that can evaluate internal organ health non-invasively, without any physical contact or exposure. As you put it, such technology exists. The Chtherans' sensory appendages fluttered slightly, suggesting interest. Yes, it would still fulfill Starfleet's medical documentation requirements while respecting your cultural boundaries. Would that be acceptable? Zyler paused, apparently processing this alternative. I require examination of the scanner's technical specifications and safety records before agreeing. Of course. Ben transferred the relevant technical data to Zyler's personal device. The Chtherans spent several minutes analyzing the information with remarkable speed, eyes moving in rapid, precise patterns across the holographic display. Finally, the last traces of crimson faded from their exoskeleton, returning to the normal blue-violet iridescence. The molecular imaging technology appears adequate and appropriately non-invasive. I accept this alternative procedure. Relief washed over Ben as he prepared the scanner. The examination proceeded in tense silence, with Zyler remaining vigilant throughout the process. The results confirmed that by Chtharan standards, based on the limited comparative data available, Zyler was in excellent health. The examination is complete, Ben said as he concluded the scan. Thank you for your patience with this miscommunication. I apologize for any distress caused. Zyler's chitin plates shifted in what might have been the Chtharan equivalent of a shrug. The incident has been logged, but will be tagged as resolved due to cultural variance rather than malicious intent. However, I recommend updating your protocols for Chtharan examinations to prevent future misunderstandings. I'll prepare a detailed report for Starfleet Medical immediately, Ben agreed. After Zyler departed, Ben found himself unusually preoccupied with the encounter. In his free hours, he began researching Chtharan culture more extensively, frustrated by how little detailed information was available about their social structures and biological processes. The most sensitive aspects of Chtharan biology and society remained heavily classified, with only the barest outlines provided to Federation personnel. For her part, Zyler found herself engaged in her own observational study. As she moved through the station in the following days, she began paying closer attention to human social interactions. The casual physical contact, hugs, handshakes, friendly pats on shoulders, seemed needlessly energy-intensive. The constant emotional displays, from laughter to tears, appeared to serve no functional purpose. And the pair-bonding behaviors she observed in the station's recreational areas struck her as particularly inefficient compared to the precisely managed reproductive assignments of Chtharan society. Yet something about these observations nagged at her analytically inclined mind. She began recording these interactions as a data set of puzzling behaviors, noting patterns and correlations that defied her understanding of efficient social organization. 3 days after their initial meeting, Ben was taking a rare moment of quiet reflection in the station's hydroponics garden. The carefully maintained space served as both a food production facility and a place of tranquility for station personnel. He sat on a bench near a display of earth flowers, enjoying their familiar scent among the strange and wonderful aromas of plants from dozens of worlds. Dr. Carter. Ben turned to find Zyler standing nearby, the Chtharan-esque chitin plates reflecting the garden's specialized lighting in subtle blue-green hues. Analyst Zyler, he acknowledged, somewhat surprised. Can I help you with something? Are you experiencing medical issues? Negative. I am here to pursue data clarification. Zyler moved to the bench with that same precise economy of motion and sat, maintaining what humans would consider a proper distance. I've been observing human interactive behaviors and find them puzzling from an efficiency perspective. What is the logical function of humans publicly displaying emotions or forming pair bonds based on feelings rather than biological or social efficiency metrics? Ben blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. That's a complex topic. We don't necessarily evaluate all our actions by efficiency standards. Emotions, relationships, connections, they're central to human experience, even if they don't always serve an obvious practical purpose. But what function do they serve? Zyler pressed, multifaceted eyes focused intently on Ben's face. Resources invested in emotional displays could be redirected to more productive activities. Ben thought carefully about how to explain concepts that humans took for granted. They serve many functions. Emotional connections foster cooperation, build trust, provide psychological support. Feelings of happiness or love might seem inefficient on the surface, but they contribute to mental health, motivation, and overall well-being. Zyler's sensory appendages fluttered, a sign Ben was beginning to recognize as indicating intense thought or information processing. Your species places value on subjective internal states as well as objective metrics. Yes, exactly. The Ctheran was silent for a moment. I have concluded that our mutual lack of understanding about respective species norms may lead to further problematic interactions. Would you consider engaging in regular cultural biological data exchange sessions to prevent future misunderstandings? Ben smiled, genuinely pleased by the proposal. I think that's an excellent idea. It would benefit both of us and potentially improve relations between our species. The arrangement is logical, Zyler agreed. I will prepare relevant Ctheran cultural data packages for our first formal exchange. Thus began a series of regular meetings between the human doctor and the Ctheran analyst. They would meet during their respective off-duty periods, sometimes in the station's library, sometimes in the observation lounge where the spectacular view of nearby stars and passing ships provided a humbling backdrop to their discussions. Ben explained concepts like family, romantic love, art, humor, and the importance of individuality in human society. He shared stories from Earth's history, literature, and his own personal experiences to illustrate these abstract ideas. So, your primary societal unit, what you call family, is not assigned based on genetic optimization or functional role efficiency? Zyler asked during one session. Generally not, Ben confirmed. Families form through emotional bonds, choice, sometimes circumstance. The relationships develop organically rather than being predetermined. And this system functions effectively despite its seeming randomness. It has advantages and disadvantages, Ben admitted. But yes, it works for us. The emotional connections provide support structures that help individuals thrive. In return, Zyler shared insights about Ctheran society that few outsiders have been privileged to hear. She explained the hive consciousness, not a full mental merging as humans sometimes incorrectly assumed, but rather a sophisticated network of shared information and values mediated through subtle pheromones and microvibrations undetectable to most other species. Each Ctheran maintains individual cognitive functions, she explained, but within parameters established by the collective needs of the hive. The hive mother serves as both biological progenitor and central processor of collective decision-making. Ben was fascinated. And emotions? Do Ctherans experience them? Zyler's chitin plates shifted in what Ben had come to recognize as mild discomfort. We experience data fluctuations that you might categorize as emotional in nature. However, they are recognized as processing inefficiencies to be controlled or eliminated for optimal function. Expression of such fluctuations is considered a sign of insufficient self-regulation. That sounds challenging, Ben said carefully. It is efficient, Zyler replied, though Ben thought he detected a subtle change in her vocal harmonics. As their meetings continued, a genuine respect developed between them. Ben came to admire Zyler's razor-sharp intellect, analytical capabilities, and dedication to her hive. He began to notice subtle signs of individuality beneath her logical exterior. Preferences in conversation topics, barely perceptible reactions to certain ideas, tiny hesitations or accelerations in her speech patterns when discussing particular subjects. For her part, Zyler found herself increasingly fascinated by Ben's adaptability, emotional intelligence, and capacity for understanding perspectives different from his own. Though she would not have admitted it openly, she began looking forward to their discussions not merely as information-gathering exercises, but as experiences with intrinsic value. Subtle signs of attraction emerged, though neither acknowledged them directly. Ben found himself anticipating their meetings, preparing topics he thought might interest Zyler, noticing small details about her appearance or mannerisms. Zyler occasionally maintained eye contact longer than Cthulhu standards dictated, or her exoskeleton would display barely perceptible color shifts when discussing more personal topics. Their developing connection, however, was soon overshadowed by a station-wide crisis. It began with isolated medical cases, a Vulcan diplomat experiencing minor neural disruptions, an Andorian engineer with metabolic irregularities, a human communications officer developing an unusual skin rash. Within days, dozens of similar cases appeared across multiple species. The only common factor was that none of the affected individuals were Ctherans. Standard treatments proved ineffective. The symptoms weren't life-threatening, but caused increasing discomfort and disruption to station operations. As cases mounted, so did tensions between species. Whispers of biological attack or unidentified virus began circulating through the station. Commander Hayes, the station's executive officer, called Ben to her office 14 days after the first reported case. "The situation is deteriorating, Doctor," she said without preamble. "We have over 40 cases now across 7 different species, and your team hasn't identified a cause." "We're working around the clock, Commander," Ben replied, fatigue evident in his voice. "The problem is that the symptoms manifest differently across species. Whatever this is, it's somehow targeting specific biological vulnerabilities in each affected group." "I need solutions, not explanations," Hayes said grimly. "I'm giving you full authority to assemble whatever resources you need. This is now your primary assignment until resolved." As Ben left the commander's office, he found Zyler waiting in the corridor, standing perfectly still in that distinctive Ctheran way that conserved energy when movement wasn't necessary. "I've been monitoring the medical emergency reports," she said without preamble as they walked together. "The pattern of species-specific symptom presentation suggests a targeted biological agent rather than a naturally occurring pathogen." Ben glanced at her sharply. "That's the working theory, yes. But we haven't been able to identify any trace of an artificial agent in any of the samples. Ctheran biological analysis methods may detect patterns your equipment cannot," Zyler stated. "The fact that my species remains unaffected while all others show symptoms suggests either Ctheran immunity or—" She paused. "Or Ctheran involvement," Ben finished quietly. Zyler's chitin plates shifted minutely. "It is a logical hypothesis that must be considered. I propose joining your investigation team. I have access to Ctheran biological databases and analytical algorithms that may prove beneficial." Ben studied her for a moment. "You realize this could put you in a difficult position if there is Ctheran involvement." "Truth-seeking is the foundation of scientific inquiry," she replied simply. "The hive mother values accuracy above all, even when inconvenient." With Commander Hayes' approval, Zyler was added to the medical investigation team. She and Ben began working closely together in the medical lab, analyzing patient samples, environmental data, and station health records. The pressure was intense, with new cases appearing daily and station morale deteriorating as species began to eye one another with suspicion. Zyler applied complex Ctheran algorithms to process the massive data sets, identifying anomalous subatomic energy signatures and microscopic engineered protein traces in the patient samples that Starfleet's standard scanners had missed. Ben correlated these findings with clinical symptoms, realizing the disease appeared to be targeting specific biological vulnerabilities in each non-Cthulhu species, acting like a sophisticated biological key rather than a natural pathogen. After 3 days of nearly continuous work, they arrived at an alarming conclusion. The energy signatures and protein structures originated from Cthulhu technology, but from a branch of biotechnology that Zeiler's delegation had claimed remained unshared with the Federation. This cannot be coincidental, Ben said quietly as they reviewed the evidence in the secluded lab during station night hours. Zeiler's normally fluid movements had become rigid. I must access internal Cthulhu communication channels. The implications are disturbing. Using her credentials and possibly exceeding her authorized access levels, Zeiler accessed encrypted Cthulhu communications. What she found confirmed their worst suspicions. Evidence of a radical Cthulhu faction present on the station, dedicated to biological purism and convinced that interaction with other species threatened Cthulhu genetic stability and superiority. This faction had secretly deployed a bioengineered agent designed to cause discomfort and instability in other species, with the goal of making Epsilon 7 inhospitable enough to force other species to withdraw, leaving Cthulhuns with exclusive access to the station's resources or strategic position. This is unacceptable, Zeiler said, her voice containing harmonics Ben had never heard before. This violates the core principles of scientific exchange and cooperation that our delegation officially supports. Ben watched her with concern. What happens if you report this to your superiors? Zeiler went perfectly still. The purist faction may have sympathizers in high positions. If I reveal this knowledge, I will be labeled as hive disconnected, a traitor who values outside species over Cthulhu interests. The punishment would involve severance of psionic links to the hive mother. A barely perceptible tremor ran through her chitin plates. It is considered worse than death among my kind. And if we take this directly to station command, the purist faction would likely attempt to eliminate evidence and possibly, she hesitated, eliminate witnesses. They operate outside normal hive parameters. Ben realized the danger Zeiler now faced. We need to protect you and find a way to expose this safely. You would assist me despite the risk? Despite the fact that my species is responsible for harming yours. Her multifaceted eyes studied him with an intensity that seemed to look through him. Of course, he said simply. This isn't about species. It's about doing what's right. Something shifted in Zeiler's posture, a subtle relaxation of plates that had been imperceptibly tense. I am experiencing an unusual data response to your statement. I think humans would call it gratitude, Ben said with a small smile. They worked through the night, developing a plan to expose the purist faction while minimizing the danger to Zeiler. They would need to gather more concrete evidence, identify all faction members, and find a way to neutralize the biological agent before confronting them. The following evening, as they were reviewing security camera footage trying to identify faction members, the lab's environmental systems suddenly malfunctioned. The air pressure began dropping rapidly, and the emergency doors sealed, locking them inside. This is not a random failure, Zeiler said, moving quickly to an access panel. The system has been overridden with Cthulhu encryption protocols. Ben rushed to the emergency communication system, but it too was offline. They know we've discovered them. They are attempting to eliminate evidence and witnesses simultaneously, Zeiler confirmed, her chitin plates now displaying alarming patterns of red and black. The air will be completely evacuated in approximately 12.7 minutes. Working together, Ben tried to force the emergency manual override while Zeiler used her knowledge of Cthulhu systems to counter the hack. The air grew thin as minutes passed, and Ben found himself becoming lightheaded. Almost. There. Zeiler's voice sounded strained as her digits moved with blinding speed across the interface. With seconds to spare, the doors hissed open. They stumbled out, gasping in the corridor's clean air. Ben caught Zeiler as she nearly collapsed, her normally precise movements uncoordinated from oxygen deprivation. We need to get somewhere safe, he managed between breaths. They'll try again. My quarters, Zyler suggested. Theron's security protocols. Difficult to override from outside. Supporting each other, they made their way through secondary corridors to Zyler's quarters. Once inside, she activated multiple security measures, turning her assigned living space into a temporary fortress. That was too close, Ben said as he collapsed onto a seating platform designed for Theron physiology. Indeed, Zyler moved to a console, checking systems. They have likely discovered our absence and will be searching. We must accelerate our timeline. The combination of near-death experience, adrenaline, and the intense connection formed through their collaboration created a charged atmosphere between them. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both realizing how close they had come to losing everything. Zyler, Ben began, then stopped, uncertain how to express the complex emotions churning within him. The Theron moved closer, her movements lacking their usual calculated precision. I am experiencing significant internal data fluctuations that correlate with what humans describe as emotional responses. This is unprecedented in my experience. Is it uncomfortable for you? He asked. It is not unpleasant, she admitted, merely unfamiliar. Something compelled Ben to reach out, gently touching one of Zyler's forearm plates. To his surprise, she didn't withdraw. Instead, her exoskeleton shifted, the plates adjusting to make the contact more comfortable. In human culture, he said softly, physical contact often helps process intense emotional experiences. A fascinating adaptive response, she replied, her voice containing harmonic undertones he'd never heard before. Perhaps worthy of experimental investigation. What began as a tentative touch evolved into an embrace as Zyler cautiously stepped closer. The feel of her exoskeleton against him was strange yet not unpleasant, warm and vibrating with subtle energies. For Zyler, the experience was overwhelming. Her highly sensitive tactile receptors registered thousands of data points. Benjamin's body temperature, heart rate, the microscopic movements of his skin, tiny electromagnetic fields generated by his nervous system. But beyond the data was something else, a connection that defied her analytical framework. When their faces drew together, it was unclear who initiated the movement. Their lips met, Ben's soft human mouth against Zyler's sensitive sensory appendages. The biochemical reaction was immediate and unexpected. Zyler's body released pheromones that had never been triggered in the presence of a non-K Theron, creating a cascade of neurochemical responses. The analytical implants embedded in her cerebral ganglia recorded a form of bioenergetic resonance between their nervous systems that Theron xenobiology had deemed theoretically impossible. They separated after a moment, both slightly dazed by the intensity of the experience. That was Ben's search for words. Unexpected, Zyler finished. Her exoskeleton had taken on a pearlescent sheen he'd never seen before. My biosensors detected a form of neural synchronicity that contradicts established Theron compatibility parameters. Is that good or bad? Ben asked with a small smile. It is significant. Zyler's multifaceted eyes seemed to shine with a new light, and it may provide additional insights relevant to our current situation. How so? The Purist faction's core ideology is based on the premise that Therans are fundamentally biologically incompatible with other species beyond basic diplomatic interaction, she explained. This experience suggests their foundational assumption may be flawed. Despite the danger they faced, Ben couldn't help but laugh. So you're saying our kiss might help save the station? It provides contradictory evidence to Purist ideology, Zyler replied seriously, though Ben thought he detected a new harmonic in her voice that might have been the Theron equivalent of amusement. But we require more substantial evidence to neutralize the immediate threat. Their moment of connection gave way to renewed focus on their mission. Through the night, they compiled their evidence, analyzed the biological agent, and identified key members of the Purist faction through Zyler's access to Theron personnel records. By morning, they had developed a comprehensive plan. They would present their evidence to Commander Hayes and a senior, trusted member of the Ctheran delegation simultaneously, while using the medical data they'd gathered to begin developing a countermeasure to the biological agent. "There is one more thing we must discuss," Zyler said as they prepared to leave her quarters. "My final choice. If we proceed, I will be choosing truth over hive loyalty. This is unprecedented for a Ctheran." Ben took her hand, an increasingly natural gesture between them. "Are you certain you want to do this?" "The logical path is clear," she said firmly. "The purest faction's actions endanger not only this station, but the future of Ctheran interstellar relations. They must be stopped, regardless of personal consequences." The confrontation occurred in Commander Hayes' secure conference room. The evidence was presented, accusations made, and denials issued. The senior Ctheran representative, Science Director Tavik, initially responded with skepticism but could not refute the meticulously compiled data. As security teams moved to detain the identified purists, the faction leader, a Ctheran biotechnology specialist named Myrex, made a final desperate move, activating a hidden device meant to release a more potent version of the biological agent. Zyler, anticipating such a move, had already prepared a countermeasure. Using her neural link to Ctheran technology, she remotely disabled the device before it could deploy its payload. "Your logic is flawed, Specialist Myrex," she stated as security restrained the faction leader. "Isolation does not strengthen Ctheran biology. It limits our adaptability and evolution. Your actions have damaged the very superiority you claim to protect." The aftermath sent shockwaves through Epsilon, 7, and within Ctheran society. Zyler faced an inquiry from the Hive Mother, conducted via subspace communication. To her surprise and relief, her actions were ultimately recognized as having prevented a greater catastrophe that would have severely damaged Ctheran's standing in the interstellar community. The preliminary data about potential biocompatibility between species, carefully anonymized to protect Ben and Zyler's privacy, raised new questions and challenges for Ctheran society, potentially leading to a re-evaluation of their isolationist policies. Diplomatic relations between the Ctherans and the Federation were strengthened on the foundation of newfound honesty, with both sides acknowledging that true cooperation required greater transparency than had previously been practiced. 2 months after the crisis, Ben and Zyler stood together in the station's observation lounge, watching the stars. A new joint research initiative had been established to study interspecies medical compatibility, with both of them appointed as lead researchers. "So much has changed," Ben mused. "For us, for the station, for relations between our peoples. Change is the only constant in biological systems," Zyler replied. Her exoskeleton had developed subtle new patterns in recent weeks, changes that, according to her, reflected her evolving neural pathways as she integrated new experiences and emotions. "Have you regretted any of it?" he asked, turning to face her. "The position you took, the risks you took, the changes you've experienced?" Zyler's multifaceted eyes studied him thoughtfully. "Regret is an inefficient allocation of cognitive resources toward events that cannot be altered. But if you're asking whether I would make the same choices again, yes, I would." Ben smiled. "That's about as close to a romantic declaration as I'm going to get, isn't it?" "I'm still learning appropriate parameters for verbalizing internal states," she replied, her chitin plates shifting in what Ben now recognized as mild embarrassment. "But my data suggests that humans place significant value on consistent behavior over time as evidence of attachment." "They do indeed," Ben agreed, taking her hand. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching as a transport ship prepared to depart, its engines glowing softly against the backdrop of stars. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Ben said eventually. "That first day in the medical bay, do you understand now why humans have gynecologists?" Zyler tilted her head in the Ctheran manner, but now with a different quality to the gesture. Her exoskeleton shimmered with colors, suggesting amusement or playfulness. She answered in her logical tone, but with a warmth that had been developing in recent weeks. "The examination of reproductive organs outside reproduction cycles remains biologically inefficient, Benjamin Carter. However, I have analyzed and concluded that the human intention behind it, concern for overall health and disease prevention, has valid data support. And I must acknowledge that occasionally, the illogical procedures of humans can lead to unexpectedly interesting data outcomes. She touched his arm lightly, a gesture she would never have made months earlier. They looked at each other, understanding that their journey was just beginning, but they had already built a strong bridge between two entirely different worlds. Efficiency is not always the highest value, she added softly, in what Ben recognized as a profound philosophical concession for Theron. No, he agreed, smiling. Sometimes the most valuable things in life are the least efficient. As the station rotated, bringing new constellations into view, they stood together, human and Theron, doctor and analyst, two beings from worlds apart who had found understanding where none was thought possible. The universe contains far more possibilities than either of our species has documented, Xyler observed, her voice containing harmonics of wonder that would have been considered inefficient by traditional Theron standards. That's the beauty of exploration, Benjamin replied. Every answer leads to new questions. A soft alert chimed from Xyler's personal device. She checked it briefly, her faceted eyes shifting focus. Our research proposal has received full approval from both Starfleet Medical and the Theron Science Directorate, she announced. We have been granted priority lab access and resources to continue our cross-species compatibility studies. Benjamin smiled. That's excellent news, though I suspect some of our most interesting findings might be kept out of the official reports. For efficiency purposes, Xyler agreed, a subtle shift in her chitin plates suggesting what might have been the Theron equivalent of a smile. Some data is best gathered privately. Their relationship had evolved into something without precedent in either human or Theron experience. What had begun with a profound misunderstanding in a medical examination room had transformed into a connection that challenged the foundational assumptions of both cultures. Neither could fully define what they had become to each other in terms their respective societies would recognize, but both had come to value it deeply. For Benjamin, Xyler's logical perspective and precise mind had become a fascinating counterpoint to his more intuitive approach to life. Her perspective challenged him to examine his own assumptions, to find the rational foundations beneath his emotional responses. For Xyler, Benjamin's emotional intelligence and capacity for empathy represented an entirely new dimension of experience. Through him, she had begun to recognize that what Therons dismissed as inefficient data fluctuations could actually be valuable sources of insight and connection. The station's lights dimmed slightly, signaling the transition to night cycle. Most of the observation lounge had emptied as crew members returned to their quarters or night shift duties. I have been developing a hypothesis, Xyler said as they watched a distant comet streak past the viewport. About our research? Benjamin asked. About us. Xyler turned to face him fully, her multifaceted eyes catching the starlight. Theron evolutionary theory holds that we developed our hive structure and emotional regulation as adaptive advantages, allowing for more efficient resource utilization and social coordination. Emotions were deemed unnecessary byproducts of more primitive neural architecture. Benjamin nodded. Similar to how some human scientists once viewed emotions as evolutionary leftovers from our primate ancestors. Precisely. However, my experiences with you have led me to question this foundational assumption. Her chitin plates shifted in subtle patterns that Benjamin had learned indicated deep thought. What if emotions are not inefficiencies, but rather a different form of information processing? One that permits certain types of connections and insights that pure logic cannot achieve. Benjamin felt a surge of warmth at her words. That's a revolutionary idea by Theron standards. Indeed, and potentially dangerous to established order, she acknowledged. Yet the evidence supports further investigation. They moved closer together, drawn by the gravity of shared understanding. How would one test such a hypothesis? Benjamin asked softly. Through continued experiential data collection, Zyler replied, reaching out to touch his face with surprising gentleness, her exoskeleton plates adjusting to create the softest possible contact. Though I must note that scientific objectivity may be difficult to maintain. Some experiments change the experimenter, Benjamin murmured as he leaned into her touch. A fascinating variable, she agreed as their lips met once more. Later that night, as they walked together through the quiet corridors toward their separate quarters, station regulations still requiring personnel to maintain their assigned living spaces regardless of actual sleeping arrangements, they discussed plans for their new research initiative. I've been thinking about potential applications beyond just our two species, Benjamin said. If we can identify the fundamental mechanisms that allow cross-species biological compatibility, it could revolutionize interspecies medicine throughout the Federation. A logical extension, Zyler agreed. Ctheran biosynthesis techniques, combined with human medical adaptability, could yield significant advances. They paused at the junction where their paths would diverge. Tomorrow is the Ctheran diplomatic reception, Zyler noted. Science Director Tavik has specifically requested your attendance. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. Oh, I assumed it would be restricted to senior staff and diplomats. Your role in uncovering the purist faction has elevated your status among Ctheran officials, Zyler explained. Additionally, she hesitated, her chitin plates shifting in that particular pattern Benjamin had come to recognize as her processing something uncomfortable. Director Tavik has become aware of our collaborative relationship. Benjamin understood the implication. Is that going to cause problems for you? Interestingly, no. The director appears to view our connection as a valuable test case for expanded Ctheran social integration protocols. Zyler's tone contained that subtle harmonic that Benjamin had learned signified wry amusement. We have been classified as an ongoing xenosocial experiment of diplomatic significance. Benjamin laughed. Well, that's one way to put it. As long as your position isn't compromised. On the contrary, my status has been upgraded. The Hive Mother herself has taken interest in my reports on human psychological structures and social dynamics. I'm not sure how I feel about being the subject of reports to your supreme leader, Benjamin said with a mock frown. I maintain appropriate privacy boundaries, Zyler assured him, then added with unexpected humor, the details of our genetic compatibility testing are classified at the highest level. Good to know, Benjamin chuckled, marveling at how far they'd come from their first awkward medical encounter. So, tomorrow's reception. Formal uniform. Indeed. And I will be wearing ceremonial exoskeleton enhancements for the occasion. They parted ways for the night, each reflecting on the unlikely path that had brought them together and the even more unexpected journey that lay ahead. The following evening, the station's diplomatic reception hall had been transformed with a blend of Federation and Ctheran aesthetic elements. The traditional blue-white lighting of Starfleet spaces was complemented by the amber-violet illumination preferred by Ctherans, creating an environment where both species could feel comfortable. Benjamin arrived in his dress uniform, exchanging greetings with Commander Hayes and other senior staff members before making his way through the gathered dignitaries. He found himself the recipient of more attention than usual, with several Federation officials expressing interest in his unique insights into Ctheran culture. When Zyler entered, Benjamin momentarily lost track of the conversation around him. She had indeed donned ceremonial enhancements to her exoskeleton, intricate overlays of what appeared to be a gold-like metal form patterns across her chitin plates, catching and refracting light with each movement. Her multifaceted eyes seemed more luminous than usual, and small crystalline structures adorned the sensory appendages around her face region. She moved through the crowd with her characteristic precision, but there was a new quality to her bearing, a subtle confidence that drew attention without demanding it. Dr. Carter, she greeted him formally as she approached, mindful of the public setting. I trust you are finding the reception agreeable. Very much so, Analyst Zyler, he replied with equal formality, though he couldn't help but add, You look remarkable. The ceremonial adornments are symbolic of my recent status adjustment, she explained, then added in a lower tone. though your aesthetic appreciation is noted and reciprocated. Science director Tavik approached them, a taller Ctheran with exoskeleton plates in deeper blue tones than Xylar's, adorned with even more elaborate ceremonial enhancements. Dr. Carter, the director acknowledged with a precise inclination of his head. Your presence honors this gathering. The Federation Ctheran Medical Initiative proposal you co-developed with analyst Xylar has generated significant interest within the Hive scientific community. I'm gratified to hear that, Director, Benjamin replied. Analyst Xylar deserves primary credit for the initiative's framework. Credit allocation is unnecessary in collective advancement, Tavik stated, though Benjamin noticed a subtle shift in the director's plates that suggested approval. However, I must confess curiosity regarding your unusual collaboration methods. The cross-cultural communication efficiency you have achieved exceeds predicted parameters. Benjamin exchanged a brief glance with Xylar. We've found that direct experiential learning is more effective than theoretical study when bridging significant cultural differences. Indeed, Tavik's multifaceted eyes shifted between them. The Hive Mother has expressed interest in expanding such experiential exchanges to other promising candidates. Your documented successes may serve as a template. As the reception continued, Benjamin noticed a subtle change in how the Ctheran delegates interacted with the station personnel. There was still the characteristic Ctheran precision and formality, but many seemed to be making deliberate efforts to engage in more human-style conversational exchanges, asking personal questions or offering observations beyond merely functional topics. Your influence extends beyond our research, Benjamin murmured to Xylar when they found a moment alone near the viewport, overlooking the station's docking arms. The Purist faction's removal has allowed more progressive elements within the delegation to implement experimental social protocols, she explained. Your medical incident report regarding our initial misunderstanding has become required study material for all Ctheran representatives preparing for cross-species interactions. Benjamin nearly choked on his drink. You can't be serious. Entirely serious, Xylar confirmed, her voice containing that subtle harmonic of amusement. It is categorized as critical cross-cultural medical communication, Case Study 1. The accompanying guidelines specifically address proper explanation protocols for reproductive health examinations across 17 species. I'm not sure whether to be mortified or proud, Benjamin admitted with a laugh. Both responses would be logical under the circumstances, Xylar observed. Her chitin plates shifted in a pattern Benjamin had come to recognize as contentment. What began as a misunderstanding has catalyzed significant positive change. As the formal portion of the reception concluded and attendees broke into smaller conversational groups, Commander Hayes approached them with a Vulcan science officer Benjamin recognized from the Federation delegation. Dr. Carter, Analyst Xylar, Hayes greeted them. Dr. Tprell has expressed interest in your research initiative and has a proposal that might interest you both. The Vulcan nodded formally. Your work on cross-species biological compatibility has potential applications beyond the immediate Ctheran-human paradigm. I am supervising the establishment of a new multi-species medical research facility on Starbase 237. Your combined expertise will be a valuable addition to the research team. Benjamin and Xylar exchanged glances. Such an opportunity would expand our research parameters significantly, Xylar noted. And Starbase 237 has access to more advanced equipment than we currently have here, Benjamin added, already considering the possibilities. I would need to consult with the Hive Mother regarding reassignment, Xylar said, but preliminary assessment suggests the scientific value would justify approval. And I need to discuss it with Starfleet Medical, Benjamin nodded, but it's certainly intriguing. Commander Hayes smiled. Nothing needs to be decided immediately. Dr. Tprell will be on the station for another week, so you'll have time to consider the offer. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Benjamin and Xylar found themselves once again at the observation window, watching the stars and the gentle movement of ships around the station. A new research posting, Benjamin mused. Together, it It would be the logical continuation of our work, Zyler agreed. Her exoskeleton had taken on a soft, pearlescent glow in the dimmed lighting. And of our personal research. Personal research, Benjamin repeated with a smile. Is that what we're calling it now? An appropriate designation for experiences that continue to expand beyond established parameters, she replied, reaching out to touch his hand in a gesture that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Data collection is ongoing. Benjamin intertwined his fingers with hers, still marveling at how her exoskeleton could adjust to make such contact comfortable. And what preliminary conclusions has your ongoing data collection yielded? Zyler was silent for a moment, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight. When she spoke, her voice contained harmonics Benjamin had never heard before, rich, complex, and unmistakably emotional by any species standards. That efficiency is not always measured in quantifiable metrics. That connection transcends biological categorization. That two separate beings from entirely different evolutionary paths can achieve a form of understanding that neither could reach alone. She turned to face him fully, and that I would not return to my previous state of existence even if such reversal were possible. That, Benjamin said softly, sounds remarkably like what humans call love. Perhaps, Zyler acknowledged, her chitin plates shifting in patterns of acceptance rather than denial. Or perhaps it is something new, a synthesis rather than a parallel. Either way, it is valuable beyond calculation. They stood together as the station continued its eternal rotation, representatives of worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart, now bridging a gap that neither had believed could be crossed. What had begun with a profound misunderstanding about the purpose of a gynecological examination had evolved into something that would change not only their lives, but potentially the relationship between their species for generations to come. So, Benjamin said with a teasing smile as they finally turned to leave the reception hall, shall I assume you now fully understand what a gynecologist is? Zyler's chitin plates rippled in what had become her version of laughter. The reproductive organ examination outside reproduction cycles now has context within your species' medical framework. However, I maintain that Ctheran biological self-regulation remains the more efficient system. Efficient, perhaps, Benjamin conceded with a grin, but not nearly as interesting. On that point, Zyler admitted as they walked together toward whatever future awaited them, your argument has merit,